press and didn't go on.
Well, thank you so much for coming today. We appreciate it. And for the people who are here on Zoom, this is Traverse Area District Library, and we have a local author today. Jim McCormick is a local retired judge who sat the bench for 24 years in Traverse City. He's a lifelong traveler and has explored over 50 countries and or 50 countries and over 4 continents. Story of a Marriage is his second book, and it's a beautiful homage to his 50-year relationship with his wife. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Betsy. I think I'll start off with just a little reading from the introduction, which explains the book. Now, this is a book of letters, so it's not a narrative. It's not something that I can just simply describe. You have to read the letters or hear the letters spoken to get the feel of what this book is about. A description of the book doesn't quite do it. But I do want to give you a little understanding of how this book came about. And I think the best way for me to do that is to read from the preface, which tells you that story as follows. When Marilyn was close to death in October 2018, I asked her where she had hidden all the Christmas love letters I had written to her since our first Christmas in 1968, exactly 50 years earlier. She said in a weak voice that they were on a high shelf in her bedroom. I had no idea where they were. I panicked when I couldn't find them. I knew they told the story of our lives together, at least from my perspective. Were they lost forever? Thank God our son David, in a more thorough search, found them. The sweet, the critical, the apologetic, the poetic, the newlyweds, the child centered years. Strains on our love. Time for world travel when you retire. Growing old together. All our linen hung out. Should we share our married life with the world? Could I speak for her in that regard? Did we have something important to say to a world in which lifelong successful marriages are hard to achieve? By the way, these were very personal letters, of course, Christmas love letters, and they were meant for her eyes only. We never anticipated that anyone, even today, would ever read these letters other than her. So that was quite a thing to have published these letters. A hard decision. I have decided the answer is yes, they should be published. I hope that by following our steps from the period of young marriage to the struggle with our personality conflicts, to the dug in commitment of mature marriage, the reader will find something authentic, real, helpful. Ours was not a marriage made in heaven. If we made it together for 50 years, 1 year at a time, as described in these letters, maybe you can too. The book, if you call it a book, started by accident. I wrote a love letter to Marilyn on Christmas Eve, 1968, our first Christmas together. And the only reason I wrote that letter was that it was Christmas Eve. We'd been married since April. And I kept putting off shopping for her because I knew I needed to get something special. And I wanted to go we were still in Detroit. We moved up here the following spring. So I went downtown and I thought, well, I'll shop at Hudson's or one of the big stores, get her something really nice, only to find out that, lo and behold, all the stores close early on Christmas Eve. Not being a shopper, I had no idea. And suddenly they were all dark. So I went into a Cunningham drugstore and I said, help me, do you have anything I can give my new bride for our first Christmas? And a rather sarcastic and cynical lady behind the counter said, well, we have some nice boxes of cigars, which I heard her way of saying, you loser. What are you doing here looking at the last second for a present? So I went home and I thought, what can I do? And I thought, well, I like to write. So I thought, I'm going to write her the best, Christmas love letter I can. So that's what happened. Lo and behold, she loved it so much, she begged me to write a Christmas letter to her every year as long as we lived. I said I would, of course. Gulp. But I had no idea where that might lead. 50 years of our lives spread out on paper, 1 year at a time. Almost no one writes like that, certainly in our modern digital world. 2 months after my dear wife's passing, this would be in 2018, 6 years ago, I penned my last Christmas letter to her. I was encouraged to write, even though she had just died and Christmas was coming up, and I thought it was a kind of a, I don't know, kind of a ghoulish idea to write, to the dead. I was encouraged that no, this will be your 50th letter. You got to do it. And so I sat down, I did it. And of course, as I say here, by far my most passionate love letter. Grief stricken, despairing, filled with a depth of love I had never before felt or expressed. Painful but beautiful. It is how I still feel today, 6 years later. I am now finally able to share the story. My memories are mostly happy now. This book is my tribute to Marilyn, a poor man's Taj Mahal. And that's how it all came about. So the letters are different each year, like as you get older, uh, maybe you get deeper. And sometimes that's positive. But there were years, midlife crisis type of thing. There were times when, we were kind of irritating each other quite a bit around Christmas time. And it was really hard to write that letter. In fact, there were a few years in which I just couldn't write at Christmas Eve. Often I would write on, that was the idea. Christmas Eve was the perfect time. Sometimes I wrote them early if I was really motivated. I might write it in the middle of December. I was just full of loving feelings and I wanted to get them down on paper. Typically, though, I wrote on Christmas Eve. But there were a few years when Christmas Eve, we just were, I don't know, not clicking real well. You know, you have children, sometimes they get in the way of your smooth relationship. And sometimes there are other things, personality conflicts. Often I say it repeatedly, comes up in these letters that we were absolutely harmonious and together on all of our values, everything of importance about how we wanted to live, how we felt about the world, how we felt about our kids, friends. etc. Uh, Politics, religion, we were completely in sync. There was only one thing we weren't in sync on. We had some might say we were very different psychologically, personality wise. You know, they say that's what attracts people to each other. You meet something that I'm missing, you know. But on the other hand, that sets you up for a lot of some disagreements. And sometimes you're, you know, extrovert, introvert, all these things can result in conflicts. And every normal marriage has conflicts. This these letters reflect that. There were years in which, well, one year, actually, my Christmas letter, instead of saying, you know, Merry Christmas, honey, it says, Happy Valentine's Day. The point being, it took me that long before we were really, I mean, somehow the cloud had lifted and we were irritated at each other. And the cloud had lifted, and I was finally felt ready to write a real loving letter. So, anyway, that's kind of like the background. Uh, I'm going to read a little bit from a few of them just to give you the sense of what this is all about. But unless you have a question, anybody have a question here? No. Okay. If you do, interrupt me. It'll be fine. I think that's more interesting than just, you know, a monologue. So I'm going to read you. I'm going to start off with reading the first letter, which is how it happened and why I wrote to her Christmas love letters for each year for 50 years. It didn't just happen because I thought, honey, I think this is the first letter. I think I'll write you one every year. No, as I told you, I didn't have a Christmas present. That's why I wrote this letter. But I really poured out my heart in absence of, you know, something I could wrap. And she loved it. This is the letter. Dear darling, may this be the merriest Christmas of your young, beautiful life, and may each succeeding one be brighter and more satisfying by virtue of your growth as a warm, loving woman. This Christmas letter is quite ironic, since one of the great accomplishments of last months for me has been learning how to enter your heart and how to open up my crusty old heart to the kind of deep, compromising relationship which we have been building. One pout, crisis, freeze, thaw, smile, quip, squeeze of the hand, ecstatic reconciliation, contented glow at a time. That kind of summarizes relationship and occurred over time. Ironic, I say, because I have no real need to place my innermost feelings about you in writing in order to avoid the embarrassment of speaking them to your face. I love to say these things to you, person to person, because somehow you have forced me to enter into the daylight and learn to share my life with someone other than myself. While I could readily say all of this in the comfortable privacy of our room, I want you to have it in writing for the occasional rough days when you may need a reminder of my love for you. As you well know, I find it hard to talk when I get in one of those grouchy moods. You know, the man cave thing. That even then I am restless for the return of my sanity so that I can squeeze the breath out of you and make you happy again. I hope you like the Monteleone stationery. I have been looking for it for a week because it seems so fitting. That's the name of a beautiful hotel in New Orleans in the French Quarter, Monteleone, very well known. We stayed there for part of our honeymoon, and we went back on our first Christmas, returned there and stayed at the same hotel. So I naturally uh, wanted to write to her on Monteleone stationery. We couldn't believe then that we could suddenly be so happy, so mutually satisfied, so ready for our common future. There we were, as green about marriage as one can be, honeymoon, uncertain about our technical proficiency, the art of love, but so happy with each other and so concerned about each other's feelings. Now we are back in New Orleans, staying at the Monteleone again. This time we are a little anxious about getting a wee one started. Let us find the courage and hope we discovered in New Orleans once before. Let us forever be conscious that our devotion does not depend upon external circumstances of fortune, but upon our love and respect for each other. You are my concrete rock in the face of change and an unpredictable future, which may raise us on high or lay us low. If we keep this one certainty, our security in each other's love, we have nothing to ever fear, and we will find many ways to pass on to others the overflow from our union of love. That, I guess, is the real test of the authenticity of our relationship. So far, it looks like a success. Your grateful husband. This is the letter that got it all started. Caused her to say, caused her to tear up and say, "You got to do this every Christmas for the rest of our lives." And which caused me to say gulp and think, "Uh-oh, where did I start?" And so, in some ways, this is really not a book. It's a it's 50 letters. It's the story of a marriage. That's the name of the book. Story of our lives together and our kids and our family and friends, really, relatives, uh, told through letters, and each one written separately, exactly 1 year at a time. So you can imagine if you were to forget marriage, forget whatever, just if you were to write down uh, once a year how you feel about life and about people and everything else from for that year, and do that every year for the rest of your life, or in this case, 50 years. Uh, it's it's not a memoir. A memoir is that's the French word, for memories. And a memoir is really somebody sits down and recalls their whole life, or I guess that'd be an autobiography, or maybe it's say you just write about a chapter in your life, a part of your life that is worth detailing for other people to read. Lots of memoirs, for example, are written by servicemen during the war. They'll just write the story from the time they were drafted, maybe until they got home, the end of the war. That's a memoir. Uh, or it could cover your entire adult life, your career. But memoir is somebody sitting after this period of time is all over. You're looking back. This is not looking back. It is looking present, 1 year at a time. Every time I wrote, I was writing about my feelings as of that day, and about, you might say, the events of another year, year 2000, or the year 210, or the year uh, 1995, and so forth. So it's not a memoir. I don't know how do I describe it, but I think it is somewhat of a unique form of writing. Uh, so if there are no questions right now, I'll go in to read a little bit from some of the letters. I said some of them were apologetic, some of them were poetic, some of them were critical. A few of them, very few of them were critical. I was telling her, I have problem. My wife had a bit of a problem with a mild form of depression. And if you're familiar with that, which just about everybody is today, you know that I mean, I say mild. She never went to hospital or anything like that, and she never missed work. But there were days when, in periods of time, maybe a month, in which she just was feeling sad. And when you feel sad, you actually are difficult to be with for your loved ones who live with you, especially the person you're married to if you're married. And it was hard on her, and to some degree, a little bit hard on me. So anyway, that's uh, that's how we got where I am today. But let me read a little bit more from some of the letters, which will give you a sense of this. Uh, Let me read one I call it Middle Age Growing Commitment. This is in 1990 on page 46 in the book. This is middle age. Dear Marilyn, another Christmas. This one in Detroit. Our families were all still are down there. Danny is in Europe. Jenny is home from state. David just being David, high school. Middle age upon us. You have been feeling it this year. I fight it and act like it isn't here yet. But the changes all around us say time is marching on. There are great grandchildren around, not ours, but the very idea is startling. Two of our three are off to college. Our routine will change. So far, these changes have been easy and pleasant, yet we see the slow decline of our parents and aunts and uncles prepares us for a consciousness of mortality and immortality. I become more conscious of the tenacity of our relationship, our long enduring marriage, our growing commitment to marriage as an institution, which is so critical to our civilization, and our growing commitment to each other. I become much more grateful to you for saying yes 23 years ago, for casting your lot with me, for taking a chance on me. I thank you for your gritty friendship. It's a funny thing to say to your wife. Gritty. Well, this is realistic. For your strength of character, for your bringing out the best in me. I love you much, Jim. Okay, so that's one type of letter. They're, they are very, very different. I'll read you one. This is a short, just a half a page. Some of them were 2, 3 pages. Some of them were as little as a half a page. But sometimes those are poetry. That can take longer to write than a 5 page letter. Poetry is hard to produce. So this was a poem which I call A Bachelor's Hubris, page 103. I can find that. Dear Marilyn, this was 2010, not so long ago. She died in 2018, so we were we were into retirement years when this was written. One night, across a crowded room in a smoke-filled basement of a church, a bachelor's hubris would meet its doom. A face, a look, would end his search. And, Marilyn, you still have that look, though 40 years and more have passed. I'll never regret that vow I took. so 40 more years we should last. So, that's a short Christmas letter. So if you go by word count, it's not very impressive, but probably took me longer to compose than just sitting down and just regurgitating the year, in print. So by the no print, these are all longhand letters, written on stationery from somewhere we had been that year. Uh, Here's one that's a page long, written in 2009 Christmas. I summarize it as I couldn't be a dreamer without you. And that's a kind of a recurring theme in these letters too, that she she always made it possible for me to pursue my dreams. And I did her too. As the time went on, she had dreams too. One was getting her master's in humanities, which is hard to do when you're teaching full time, but she did it, and that was a great accomplishment for her. And there are some things like that. Anyway, I couldn't be a dreamer without you. 2009, page 101. Dear Marilyn, one of the outstanding aspects of our marriage has been the consistency with which we have gone about seeing the world together. This stationery from the moors and headlands of Mendocino, California, is typical of the memories we share. Russia, China, Korea, all of Europe, much of Latin America have become a part of who we as a couple are. We are in part who we are because of the great privilege we've had and have taken advantage of to see the people, cultural, and natural beauty of God's earth. For your part in making the earth my oyster, I am forever grateful. I know you have suffered through some nerve-wracking and physically exhausting exploits which you might not have personally chosen. You lent yourself to my passion. I love you for that. I'm talking about travel. Not that you weren't a veteran of world travel when I met you, but I, sometimes abandoning prudence, have thrust us into a few problematic and hairy situations. This Christmas, I want to acknowledge that I couldn't aspire to be a dreamer without your loving tolerance and active partnership. You have made many of my dreams come true. My love, Jim. Okay, uh, I don't know, maybe we have gone long enough. I could go on and on and on, but I got some special letters here I would like to read, but then again, you know, it's been a half an hour, so. Uh, any of you, any questions you have about the writing of the book or about the contents of the book?
Did your wife read them in front of you when she received them on Christmas, or she do it by
The question is, would my wife read the letter back to me? No, I would give them, actually, they would be in an envelope with a ribbon on it, and they'd be under the tree or something like that. And she would, next thing I know, she would say, I read it and I loved the book. I loved it. We didn't talk about it that much. And she would put them on her dresser in our bedroom. And sometimes I'd look at them and thinking, I hope they get into the box that she kept, where she kept them hidden. Because my wife was not the kind of a business organized person who would necessarily get the letter into that hidden box. Because there would be a whole lot of wrapping paper, Christmas wrapping paper maybe, on her dresser, other things like that. Sometimes I would think, gee, I hope that letter doesn't fall into a wastebasket, after all that trouble. Well, it turns out that of the 50 years, there are at least 4 letters missing. I have no idea why they are not in that box. I think one year I was sick. I got burned. I was in the hospital. I can't imagine that I wrote the letter that year. I probably didn't. I probably didn't even think about it. I was too miserable because it was there from like middle of November until the middle of January. So I probably didn't write it. But the others, I'm sure I wrote. And my best guess is that they somehow got mixed up with the wrapping paper and all this stuff on her dresser and got stuffed into a wastebasket, tragically. But beyond that, I don't know. And somebody said, well, maybe she didn't like those letters, didn't want didn't want those to be kept in case somebody might read them someday. Although we never talked about that. Had no idea that anybody but her would ever see them. So that was a tough decision to make after she'd passed on. I mean, I never thought about it ever until after she was gone, and people said, you should turn this into a book. I mean, so. Pardon?
It's a great commitment for people. I mean, you just don't,
Commitment,
yeah, you just
well,
don't see that much.
I didn't think about it that way because it was 1 year at a time. I only said we'll do this the rest of our life. I thought, well, maybe in the next year, one of us will be gone. Won't have to write any more letters. But no, I really didn't. I didn't think of it as a commitment. Although each year, there were some years, I say a few, maybe 4 or 5 years, in which at Christmas time, we just weren't getting along. And I would put off writing it. And as I told you, 1 year, it started out Happy Valentine's Day. So you know that, in fact, in that year's letter, I said in it, I said, some days maybe our kids will read these letters and will they be upset or shocked or disappointed that their father didn't write his Christmas love letter until February? Is this kind of like, now we're exposing what a bad marriage they had? And then I concluded that, I mentioned in the letter too, that they know us well enough that they know that this sometimes happened, that we were arguing, and we're not in a position to write a love letter.
Very nice.
Thank you.
It's beautiful.
Okay, thank you. Well, I guess we're done. Thank you all very much.
I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it for you coming out. That's just fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, well,